Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about everything from synchronicity to the eyes and connecting it all together. And just after having that talk yesterday, it really shifted things where I had a synchronicity right away. I had more energy yesterday after the talk. As well, I was going through my emails in the evening because I now have the capacity to look back at them and see what I had missed and sort of delete all the extraneous emails I don't need. And I wanted to at least go through the last 3 months when I was depressed and I wasn't really paying attention very well to email. And I could have just left something aside to do later, knowing that I had the email saved. And then I went back even further, which was interesting because I like to keep most emails, not like the subscriber list type ones, but of what I'm doing because, it's like, oh, look, I bought this, I did that. Oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember talking to that person. And then eventually I got back to the first email that I was really surprised by, which is someone had emailed me and they were introduced to me through email through a friend that I know. And I never got back to that person. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first thing I have to do now. And so I did that. I reached out to that person and apologized and said I'd love to connect further by email because we're far away. So that was one thing. And the reason that this person had been connected up with me is because they also like to do kind of like wordsmithery, which we were talking a little bit about yesterday. And with all the different bits and pieces that I've written down over the years, a lot of them have been made up words or wordplay. So we'll get back to that. But so this person was a wordsmith person. And then I went back a little bit further and I found another email, which I vaguely remembered looking at. And I remembered looking, like this was back in June, like say mid-June or something. And I remember thinking, I think I should know what this is about, but I don't know who's emailing me and who they're actually talking about. And I probably could have clued in, but I didn't at the time. And then, in sort of an energetic creative state, just kind of keep going and don't necessarily look back at the emails because usually I keep up with everything in that state. And so I had this like sinking feeling, and as my mind started to put together what the email was about, I was in a state of kind of shock and dread and like, no, I can't believe I missed this and I can't believe that this happened. And I still didn't really know. And well, what had happened was that a lady who was basically a wordsmith extraordinaire and so many things, I can't even put her into words because she had so many of her own words. But she was like, basically I saw her as a future mentor that I would wish to communicate a lot more with. And I did take a writing class with her maybe 6 months or so before. But basically they were saying that somebody named Laurel had passed away, or they said that we lost her or something. And so when I was reading it again, I realized that it was likely like 99% Laurel Airica, who is just an amazing, she has a YouTube channel and I recommend watching a bunch of her videos. Because when I first saw her on the Aubrey Marcus podcast, which is a great, great interview, I immediately looked into her work and I found out that she had sort of these writing circles with a small group of people on Zoom and, charged a nominal fee, and they went for 4 consecutive Wednesdays or what have you. And I signed up. And the reason I did was because in hearing a lot of her podcasts and different things that she had on YouTube, I felt like the gift that I have with language was very similar to hers. And at the same time, knowing that she didn't seem to have a diagnosis of a mental health condition and doesn't, that I'm aware of. Well, she never said anything. So it was kind of a test or an experiment that I was curious, right? I wanted to go and share some of what I wrote and see what the group might say, right? It was a place to try that out. And I shared something that I wrote because somebody had asked me to write a short article on the book that I wrote. And instead of writing an article or a little essay, some sort of spoken word slam poetry thing came through. And I ended up reading that for the first week. And they had some helpful tips and everything. And she said, we should talk, or we'll talk, something like that. And I really felt like that would happen someday. That she would be more of a mentor, because she was, regarding language stuff, she was where I would wish to be. So, and not only that, my spoken word, it was about mental health, right? It was about bipolar to some degree. So it's not like I was like shamed or rejected or anything like that. I was encouraged and given some cool ideas to make it into a bit of a kind of like a performance, like to be able to do it to share it as a performance rather than kind of read it out. And yeah, they had some great suggestions for making it really artistic and as a way to invite people to be more interested in this sort of wordplay thing. So I found myself going to YouTube and watching some of her latest YouTube videos. And part of me was trying to figure out if she had passed, because I had sent the email and I was quite sure, but I didn't know if and when I would hear back. And I also felt guilty about replying so late, in that, my initial feelings are of shock are sort of longer past when other people would have been processing. And that was my kind of like oversight. And so eventually, after watching some of the videos and really enjoying them and actually writing a few things down about this, my sort of subjective interpretation of drawing parallels to my own life, I eventually found in a comment that she had indeed passed away on, I think it was March 22nd of this year. I wrote it down. Yeah, March 22nd. And this feels like it feels like a great loss. And while it is, of course, I feel bad for those who are closer to her, because I, from what I understand, some of the people in the writing group had been there cycle after cycle for quite some time. And, I was blessed to just be part of one group. So this sad news felt like a synchronicity, and it made me realize that even just at home, sitting, reading, and doing different things, like a task of trying to catch up with losing track of things by being depressed, how fast I can get back in this mode of interest in learning and connecting the dots and looking at some of this channeled information that comes through. And I really felt it as significant. In a way, it's like, did I create this partly by not cluing in to what had happened before? And like the two, so that's one of the significance possibilities. Or was it during those months where I was in the energetic creative state, was I overlooking the part that was maybe quite significant, or it's supposed to be a significant theme in my life, like playing with words, being a wordsmith or a wordser? So part of how I see it is that I was overlooking that part during that period of time. But that doesn't matter because time has passed. But what it does really is it allows me to point in that direction. So yesterday when I was talking, I was just sort of talking about using AI with a lot of the content and the words that I have here. And then after talking about that, it seemed like the task I did next, which was go through my emails, which I hadn't done in months, is the thing that led me to the clue of what to look at next in the content. Because one of the documents I have like documents for, say, 6 different books, or 7, or maybe even 10 on different topics, and one of the topics is language. So if I was to think, well, what do I look at next? Well, maybe it's the language bit. Because the day before yesterday, I was looking through the content and being like, do I talk about perception? And that book didn't have a lot of longer parts written out. And I was like, no, I guess not. And then I was like, what about like information? No, I don't know. And then, the language one definitely resonates. And there's one other topic that happened by a synchronicity as well, which we'll talk about, and how it relates. So in a way, the experiences I had in the last 24 hours after talking things through, I got synchronicities related to 2 of them. 2 of the, say, 6 to 10 topics, like what to look at. And then if I put those 2 together, it's interesting what might come out of it. So maybe taking the more fully written content from those 2 topics is a way to go. So yeah, just being at home, doing a task, trying to catch up, basically, and starting to re-uncover what I was learning before, which I forgot about. So the combination of beginning to be interested in what I was up to before, plus the combination of trying to get back on track in daily life, which includes making sure I didn't miss anything in my emails. Those 2 things together has alchemized something. And then not only that, with the loss of a wonderful human being, it feels more significant. It doesn't feel only guided by my own interest. And so in watching some of her YouTube videos and listening to some of her talks, and I have listened to them before, but my memory usually just kind of deletes everything. But she was talking about an early story from her life where she was at home and she was really little, like five years old, and somebody was opening a box for some kind of stereo system being put together, and a bat flew out and went into the tree. And somebody said to her, "Go outside, there's a bat." And she had expected there to be like a baseball bat out there. And so she was sharing that that was the first time that there could be two words with one meaning, or two things with the same word with totally different meaning of what it is. And I was listening to that story, and I don't remember when it came to me in the day. If it was, I don't think it was when she was telling the story. And her story was about when she first took interest in words. And then I was thinking about a story that I shared in my book about an apple. About an apple that, when my sister and I were trying to cross the road when we were really little, she was probably kindergarten and I was probably grade 2. And it was a busy street. When we were crossing and almost all the way to the other side, the lunch kit opened up. It's like one of those like retro 80s lunch kits that had that metal clasp. Opened up and there was just a single apple in there, and past the crosswalk it was a hill, and it was like a very steep hill, very long. And so we watched this apple roll all the way down the hill. I even saw it hit the curb at the end of the hill because it was because there was a sidewalk there. And so I was in the midst of it all, I found myself feeling really bad for the apple, that it was lonely and it was going to sit down there. Bad for my sister that she didn't have a snack for school. Bad for my mom that she had packed this apple and we had lost the apple. And we did go back and get a different snack. But that was the moment I sort of turned off my sensitivity, because I realized I couldn't be that sensitive in this world for some reason. And so in the moment, at around the same age that Laurel realized that she had a connection with words, or she was really interested, I sort of was shutting down my sensitivity to being whatever I might have been with that at a young age. And she also talked about later on in life going to China. And if I'm remembering this correctly, she, in Chinese or Mandarin or whatever language she was learning about there, the word for bat in that language was the same as happy. And there was something else too. And so she made a big connection with that as well. So part of sort of synchronicity and meaning and significance, if you're tracking it for yourself or you're feeling it along the way, are these types of stories. And I actually collect my synchronicity stories. Like, I write them down in a specific note in my phone, so then I keep track of them. But what also struck me with this apple, I was like, okay, I have this apple story. And then when we think about the apple as the apple of knowledge, the forbidden fruit, right? So the apple rolled away from me, like this knowledge of my potential sensitivity, and the apple rolling away and losing the apple made me feel like I can't be sensitive. And like, to me, that feels significant. And I was like, whoa, that's really strange, because just listening to her share some of her stories about words, as well as some significant things that gave her clues that words is what she's meant to take interest in, made me sort of draw parallels. And I'm grateful for that, because it adds another layer to that apple story, which I can, I find it interesting, right? Like, for myself. And I find her story interesting too. But then if her story and my story help others to be like, oh, like what are some of the origin stories of my gifts? So this is actually, I'm just seeing this now that it's kind of interesting for re-uncovery, which is the thing I created. I don't even know what to say about it right now. My brain's not fully back to 100%, but having an origin story as part of the learning, you know. I do keep a note that is about these more like autobiographical bits. They're just about me, like sort of personally, and little stories, and I keep track of those. I just don't want to put my like sort of personal insights into the mix of the other stuff. So that's probably the main reason that I do it that way. And, you know, now with this Apple story and the knowledge rolling away and then coming back to that, right? And, you know, even some of the things with my iPhone that have happened over the years. So yeah, that is related to that. And another thing that I found interesting was that when she was 5 and had that thing happen and realized that she was interested in words, when I was 5, I remember that I wanted to sing, but I couldn't sing, and I had a terrible voice. My voice still is, you know, it's not the greatest voice. And I had to audition for this choir. Somehow I got an audition, and I've ended up not going because basically I was going to need to sing "Oh Canada," and at 5 years old, I did not even know the words. You know, I didn't know the words. You know, you could say like the first line after "Oh Canada," I didn't even know what the words were. Like, you know, when you are listening to your parents' music when you're little and then you think certain phrases or a certain thing, like apparently we all thought ABBA's Voulez-Vous was Boulez-Boo, right? We don't know what a vous is. So I didn't know what most of the words were in "Oh Canada." And nobody told me or helped me, and I was too afraid to ask, and I was too afraid to say why, and I never did say why I didn't go to that audition. You know, and I'm glad I didn't, in the way that I was not prepared. It wouldn't have been good at all. I knew I was going to sing words that were just gibber, like total gibberish. At least I knew I didn't know the words, which doesn't happen all the time when, like for other situations, like Boulez-Boo, thought that those were the words. And so what was interesting for me, like drawing sort of parallels to Laurel Airica sharing, was that she shared another bit, which was that she had, around that same age, said to her mom that she knew all the words in the English language. And she said, instead of her mom saying, "Oh, that's great, what's your favorite word?" or something like that, she said, "No, you don't," or "I bet you don't," and then said some word that Laurel didn't know. And then Laurel said she pretty much assumed it was a different language word because in her mind she knew all the words in the English language. So then what I clued in from my own story was that, you know, at 5, I didn't know any words. I didn't know the words. She knew all the words. I didn't know the words. And I knew I didn't know the words. Like I had an experience where I very well knew that I did not know all the words in the English language. And so just listening to her as a wordser person, it's given me another take on some of these some of these experiences and drawing parallels, but then seeing where there are differences. And even in listening to her spoken word and some of her interviews and different videos on YouTube, I have this sense that she has created quite a few words, and she also is quite adept at learning new words and finding really great words in the English language. So like studying words, or I'm not sure what her process has been for discovering these words. Like, somebody might tell her the word, and she might get them through synchronicity versus like studying the dictionary. Whereas for me, I tend to focus more on making up a lot of words. And even in listening to her talk, a few of the words that she talked about, I've also considered and probably talked about on an audio somewhere. And she said in one of her interviews that we have an evolutionary impulse to evolve language. And I definitely resonate with that. I'm super interested in where the words come from when we speak them, and what I experience is perceiving language. So it's sort of like being a farmer of words, and the way to farm them or harvest them is to see, is to perceive. So if you can imagine that, I have a default mode network, we all do in our brain. And if I'm able to see outside the default mode network box, I'm going to see something different. And then I might say something different that I would not have otherwise said. So I also heard her say, I think she was talking about somebody named Peter Crone, who I don't know who that is. But he said, when you're talking about this, you're not describing something. Your words are not descriptive. They're creative. And that really resonated with me because I feel like when I speak sometimes, not when I'm in a depressed state, but some states, there's a state within us that when we speak, it's creative. It's not describing something. Like as soon as I try to start to describe something, the thing is in the past. Like I saw it, and now I'm going to talk about that thing that I saw. So the thing is already in the past, right? But there's another place where words can come from. And to me, it's possible that that is something that the right brain is more involved in. And we'll get to that at some point. But for now, after watching those videos, I wrote down a few people who are like wordsy people. There was Terence McKenna, Buckminster Fuller. I haven't read much of his stuff, nor Terence McKenna's really. There's David Bohm. He has a whole chapter on language. And, maybe like Robert Anton Wilson. I don't know, there's a certain number of people that are talking about, or were talking about language. And they still have videos out there and everything. But for me, it's like a meta process to be interested in language, because there's all this language that comes through and I don't really know how and why it does. I know when it does, I experience it, and then I take note. But the thing is that since I've been diagnosed bipolar since like 2011, I don't see this as only a symptom of mental illness because I have created a lot with it, and perhaps not, if I hadn't done that, maybe it would be more, I would probably ignore it, right? Or I'd try to, I'm not sure what I would do, I really can't say because it's not something that I would do. I find it interesting. I find it interesting because I didn't think of it. It was part of my thinking in a way, but it's not something that it feels like that I thought of. And then, of course, when this leads to sort of the second topic, and it's related, but not exactly. I think before I came across this email that saddened me, I went on YouTube yesterday, and at the very top was a video, and it just said something about this person was banned when he tried to say this to science or something. And so that piqued my interest. But then, I checked out the channel number of people subscribing when I clicked on the video, and, it had like 4 million subscribers. So I'm like, okay, this is not just nothing. So I started listening, and I was immediately interested, we'll say, because they were talking about the human eye, and they were talking about, okay, this is going to be mainly just a little introduction. Oh, last thing about words that I want to say. Let me just see if there's anything else, because taking a big breath in. Now, this is related to synchronicity, getting back into learning mode, and then all of a sudden all these things being presented to me, and just feeling like I'm right back into this sort of energetic mode of learning, and being sort of guided as to what to learn next. And then also realizing, I can't actually, all of a sudden I'm in a state where I can't watch too much of it again, because it just expands and expands and expands. So even though I watched a lot of YouTube the last few months, I won't be able to watch it so much because it will just create too much. And, I want to have time for my own understanding. So today I was going to talk about stuff earlier, and I was like feeling the energy to do so, and then I sat down in order to talk, and I had no energy. And I felt like, okay, do I have no energy because, maybe I need to go outside, which I feel like I didn't have energy for. But I felt like I haven't been out in a few days, I should go outside. So I went for a walk, and then I went for a few groceries, which I wasn't sure if I'd be able to, but I was fine. So I needed to get out there. And then also, like, with the eye video feeling really inspiring, and then the news about Laurel Airica feeling really intense, all of a sudden I was in a state where there's a lot of energy, and I need to make sure I stay grounded. So maybe the universe just took the energy away from me when I was going to sit down to talk, and it was like, okay, go outside. So I noticed that losing energy might be a compass rather than an excuse just to sit down and like do nothing, which is okay too, like depending, right? I did nothing for many months, but I'm kind of done with that for a while. So the thing with these memes or these insights that come to me, and then I write them down. Basically I paid for those memes with my dopamine and my cognition, like however that energetic process is of that it is required of the brain in order to have that come to mind, whether it's like from my subconscious and I'm thinking it, or if it's like from neutrino showers from the sun, like I don't even know. So, it has cost something for the universe to put that in my brain, or for me to put that in my brain. However it goes in my brain, there's a cost. There's dopamine, right? If I perceive it and I feel like it's new, it's something that I have never thought before, or I don't feel like I've thought that, then I write it down, right? So in that way, that dopamine and that cognitive energy that is used turns into an action of writing it down, which is also the energy of the ink and the paper and the hand writing it down. And so it takes more energy to write it down. So there's the effort of whatever gets that perception into my brain, and then there's the effort of that perception that's in my brain being written down or typed out for later. And then it's there. It's like an artifact of that. And just like I was mentioning yesterday about how I once heard somebody say they collect all the different paint colors and codes and stuff in a spreadsheet for cars or something. Then, this is sort of my thing where I'm collecting these bits of language. Now, just in saying that, right, I've collected all these bits of language, even if I'll never read them all, or if nobody will ever read them all, I can very quickly and easily make AI read them all, So there is something that would take it into consideration. So in the release of ChatGPT and AI and things, I see that there could still be a use for it in a way, right? So, and to add to that, these thoughts and ideas are things that have come to my mind that I've captured. They're probably not in ChatGPT. Like, people who get these insights through other mechanisms of awareness or knowing or perception may or may not write them down, may or may not write them into the internet. And so these kind of fragments are missing from ChatGPT, possibly. And that might be something for it. And I did, years ago, I read a PhD dissertation where somebody did their dissertation on someone with bipolar's notebooks, like over the years, and they were all handwritten, and they did a linguistic analysis on them to see how speech in terms of writing in journals would change depending on the state, because that person would also say like, oh, I'm mania or whatever, and speech would change, right? So I've captured the speech that comes to me, and then eventually I might be able to do my own linguistic analysis on my own data set. Like, imagine if that person who surrendered their notebooks to be analyzed could just like scan them all and then have the computer do a linguistic analysis. Something like that, right? Because I actually found that PhD dissertation quite interesting. Like, it talks about certain parts of speech, or I don't even know what they're called, say like using adverbs more or less, whether in, say, depression or mania. And then the person also talked more about career and sort of solo type themes, and that when off medication, and when they were on medication, they spoke more about family and like sort of, the way we're supposed to be type things. So it just makes, it's interesting to look at the language that happens. And then not only that, there's a paper, I can't remember what it's called offhand, but they talk about how the ability for humans to have language, to speak language, likely came from the same mutation that led to schizophrenia and things like that. So basically, in a nutshell, it's because of that type of mind that we were able to create language. And for me, like my diagnosis is bipolar, but I feel that to be experientially true because I see language. I experience language being created through me. So then, I see that I have that capacity partly. Now, whether that's genetic or what have you, still, or how that works exactly, it's basically important for humans being able to develop language in the first place to acquire that capacity, but it could be important for the continued evolution of language, right? Like even in life as we know it, we're introduced to new terms and new ways of using words and this and that all the time. We can do that as well. We don't need to only wait to be told, right? And like whether or not that gets passed on to anyone else is a different story. Again, this is like a hobby to play with language. Imagine a world where it's a vocation to do that. That's another thing. So going to this video about the eye, and this video made me see about connecting more to the science. And these are things I'm already doing and I already do. But it's helping me to narrow it down. And we're going to talk a little bit about what I saw in that video, but this is very, very general. And it's more like brainstorming out loud. I made some notes as I was watching the video, and part of me wishing to brainstorm out loud is that in my experience, even just yesterday talking, and in previous years when I had a process for speaking out loud as well, it immediately gave me energy for the rest of the day and gave synchronicity just by checking email that seemed to be created even at the time those emails were sent months ago, because they got left until this moment, right? So speaking has an effect. Whether it also has to do with the technology listening in to put the right video at the top of my YouTube feed, or however it works. Like for me, I don't experience myself as this human like standing on top of the earth. It's like the whole existence is everywhere, and I'm integrated into it. So when I'm speaking into this space in this room, it is touching through sound vibration everything in the room and however much further it goes, and there's feedback from that, right? So that's part of what I wish to do here. And the video is talking about what's the guy's name? Dr. Jack Kruse. And the video that I watched was about 25 minutes, and turns out there is a longer lecture. And when I clicked on the longer lecture, which is about 2 hours, it started about 3/4 of the way through. Now that tells me, from what I know about YouTube, is I probably was watching that before. I have no recollection of it. So I might have been watching it years ago, because the original video is from 2017. So it's not very new. And then this person made some clips out of it to share it in a new video. at the top of my feed. So these are just notes on what he said in that short clip. My wish would be to watch the whole long video, make notes, check all the papers, read the abstracts of all the papers, search the papers for relevant terms and read those parts, all of that. Because there was a few things he talked about I wasn't quite following because I think parts were missing. Well, they were, but the steps in between were missing. And I'm fortunate because I did study biology, so I do have that language as well as that scientific approach where it makes it just a little bit easier to understand than if somebody didn't know anything. Like somebody was saying on another video that they were reading something scientific one time and they didn't even know what the word chemistry was. So like every single word they had to look it up. I don't have to look up that many. And even if I don't know exact, I have a sense of it anyway. So what I saw from that video, well, Dr. Jack Kruse said that, and this Dr. Jack Kruse, he's, I think, a neurosurgeon. And he said that through the eye, light was able to make chemicals in us that weren't there before. So that was his eye-opening moment where he didn't understand how that could happen. So the way I think it's possible is, or the way I can compare it is, you can think about photosynthesis in a plant. So when the light hits the chloroplast of the plant, through that process and through that creation of energy and that harnessing of the energy, the plant is able to make glucose for itself to eat. Pretty sure I got that right. Probably 20 years since I've had to know that. So when light comes to our eyes, it actually makes certain chemicals in our eye. And he talks more about that. He mentions how energy and mass are equivalent, like E equals mc squared. So energy is the light coming into the eye, and then somehow that's converted into mass, to something, to some chemical in our eye. And something I'll add is that I read a paper about how that information might also be equivalent to energy and mass. So it could be energy, mass, and information are all equivalent. And I haven't seen anything about that in anything but that paper. Not only that, there was another paper I read that it may be true that information has mass, has a slight amount of mass. And they designed an experiment for that, but it hadn't yet been carried out. So there's something about information. And the reason I'm saying that and sort of sprinkling that in is because it's possible as well from my perspective in research, because I've already done a bunch of research on this stuff, that energy can come into the eye like light, like looking at stuff, and that can create information in the brain, new information. That there's actually a mechanism he talks about later that could be so, even though he didn't mention the word information. And he also talked about there being aromatic amino acids in the eye, like they're just loaded in the eye. I don't know if that's in like the vitreous humor, which is the like jelly-like stuff in there, or what exactly he might say in the extended lecture. And he said that the aromatic amino acids, they absorb UV light. So the aromatic amino acids are tyrosine, tryptophan, phenylalanine, and there's one more I don't remember. So they absorb the UV light. It's one of the things that absorbs it. And all aromatic means is that there's a benzene ring, which is the 6-carbon hexagon type structure as the main part of the amino acid. And then they have different branches depending on the amino acid. So that benzene ring is basically a photon trap. And something interesting that he shared, that this, when I'm reading and watching videos, and it's always extrapolating to something else. It's not like trying to learn the facts, like, oh, cool, like I'm learning that there's aromatic amino acids in the eye. There is a reason why I find that interesting, because there's other things that I've read. And what this is pointing to is some of this could be clues as to the way information comes into the brain like that. So he mentioned that there's a wavelength range between 250 nanometers and 380 nanometers that is absorbed by the benzene rings of these aromatic amino acids. And because it's absorbed by these benzene rings, we don't see these frequencies. So between 250 and 380, it's not visible light. We don't see it. And, you know, perhaps it's because there's no receptors on the retina that will, you know, see that. And perhaps it's also because those frequencies are absorbed by the benzene rings that are prior to the retina. Not sure yet. So, and he says we don't see it because it's designed to do something else. And I'm wondering if this range has anything to do with part of the way that some of this information comes through. And I'm wondering if it has a relation to insights. And there's many layers to this, so we will get to it as we go. Now, that part might not even be true. Like, this particular range might not have anything to do with the insights, because that might have to do more with the light that we can actually see to turn into some kind of insight or information in the brain. But this could have something to do with the energy behind it. Because when we're opening our eyes and looking, all these frequencies are there. You know, we can't like pick and choose what's there. But one part could have this other function, which is more to do with energy. And so the other thing he was saying is that when sunlight hits water in the eye, I believe, then what it does is it creates millions of free electrons in the body to fuel biochemical processes. That's what he said. Millions of free electrons in the body to fuel biochemical processes. So this is implying that, you know, we need sun, and we need the sunlight in our. It could be also the sun on our skin that does this. I'm not sure. Hopefully it will expand more in the long lecture, or it will be available in a paper that is referenced or talked about briefly in that lecture. So he takes a really interesting turn as well with this. And it's kind of the main point that the person who edited the video is trying to make this part as the main point. And this part for me is more like, oddly enough, this next part for me is something very similar to something that I said many years ago to myself. And I have it somewhere. So I know that I said that. Let's see if we can kind of talk about it. So he talks about blue light, you know, from devices and, LEDs and everything. And we've all heard that it's bad, right? And I know it's bad. I do my best. I spent months watching TV, so I didn't do that good. But it reminded me of it, because when I was watching a lot of YouTube in those months, one video was about blue light and how basically it was saying that blue light was part of MK Ultra mind control. Now, I didn't fully go into researching that, but if it's something like blue light messes with our eyes so we can't produce energy the same way that we would if we had more optimal lighting for our biology to thrive, then it is kind of mind control, because if it's making me stupider or not being able to create as much energy because of the interference or too much blue light at wrong times or too much technology, then of course it's controlling my mind, not like somebody standing with puppet strings, but these are strings of wavelengths of photons and light. So I'd probably look more into that, but I found that fascinating just to hear that little tidbit that they made that discovery, and then that's sort of how they have deployed it or whatever. Because I did also research light before, and the exact frequency it shouldn't be for us is the exact frequency that it is. So I remember that, at least. So yeah, it's unavoidable. But the next part that he goes into, which again, like I said, is sort of the main part of the way that shorter video is edited, is that basically blue light causes obesity or weight gain or what have you. And let's see if I don't know if I wrote that much about that at this moment, because it wasn't the theme I was trying to capture, and also, I'll be interested to see how much that is really talked about in the longer video. Because if I think about it, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, which is blue light, for the last 3 months, and I gained about 15 pounds, or probably more like 20 by now. And I used ChatGPT and I said, how many extra calories per day would I have to eat in order to gain 15 pounds in 2 months as a middle-aged female? And I can't believe I'm middle-aged. So it said 1,000 calories. And, I wasn't enjoying an extra 1,000 calories, this is so great. But yeah, I probably was eating a lot more though than, now that I think about it, I probably wasn't eating enough calories to maintain weight when I was really creating before I hit depression. So that could have been part of just getting back to a few extra pounds good weight. And yeah, I definitely didn't exercise or even walk around or go outside or do much of anything. So I could have easily gained that, and it doesn't matter. I was just curious to see how ChatGPT would do that, calculation. It's a way to make a calculation quickly of just random things that otherwise would just be too hard to calculate. That one's not that hard. So here's the thing. I years ago had this idea, this thing come to mind that the information itself, not processed, or so for example, for myself, say I'm off medications and I'm having tons of insights, I'm writing them down. I probably am not that motivated by food and losing weight. Then all of a sudden I go on a lot of medications and I gain a lot of weight, but I'm not eating that much more. I was sensing that the information itself gets stored in the body because we're still able to perceive it Like it still comes into our eyes in a sense, or is sensed by us, but then the medication is stopping it from being acted upon or written down. It's not just the writing down thing. It's like those insights change a lot of the time. It's a different kind of world. So then, there's like the manic body, which is lighter because of this moving with this field of information and meaning. And then there's this slowed down body that with the medications, like I saw the mechanism of the medications possibly blocking this information and meaning flow, which, it could even just like, it can cause inflammation to no longer sense this meaning that life can have, or, there's so many different ways that it's possible. I'm not saying like I did any like research studies on this possibility, but I kind of unfolded it. And I was reminded of another layer to this. So what I'm saying with this short clip that I watched is it could show a mechanism for weight gain in and of itself with the blue light thing. At least that's what he's saying. But what I'm wondering, so imagine I'm in mania and I'm outside kind of all the time, walking around, doing things, talking to people. I'm not on screens. Like when I was in that creative state the last 4 years, I didn't spend that much time on screens, except when I was writing my book. In the last 6 months before I was depressed, I wasn't really on screens at all. And I was quite thin. I was 109 pounds, So there's something about, looking around at the beauty of everything and having insights. And that's healthy light turning into sound, which we'll get to. Or, sitting inside with blue lights, looking at screens and things like that. And I don't think one causes the other per se. Like, this is where I think it's different a little bit here, is like, I have mania and I have depression sometimes. And then it just happens that I'm going to be looking at screens, and then it happens that I'll gain weight. And the opposite happens when I'm like out and about and in mania. And I know I use the word mania a lot, but for me, it's like just sort of part of life. It's just like energy, extra energy for life. It's not like this big thing. So I might start calling it something else at some point, like energy. So the other thing is that months ago, I watched a podcast on YouTube. It was an episode of Diary of a CEO, and the guest was Dr. Tara Swart. And she said something in the talk that really, really stuck with me. And the title of the talk is actually talking about stress leaks through the skin. Stress leaks through the skin. So what she's saying is that cortisol leaks through the skin, stress. And if I am recalling correctly, she also says in the interview that when we talk about this stuff, it actually releases cortisol. So I can't remember if it was just stress leaks through the skin, or also when you talk about it, it leaks out of our body as well, like the skin, or I don't know if it's the breath as well, because there's skin in the mouth. And releasing cortisol could also be a way to lose weight, right? Because too much cortisol can cause fat to accumulate, like belly fat or whatever. And from remembering this, I had an insight, this is something that I've never thought before. A lot of them come from researching and learning, but it's like making a next idea about it related to things I've experienced. So like, again, I'm not reading it to memorize facts. My memory stinks. I'm reading it because I want to see what insights I'll have, what extrapolations, what kind of like, eureka, serendipity, everything they call it, where it's like a flash of like something new, some new possibility. So what I was thinking, or what came to me, was that there could be, like, the cortisol that comes out is stress. And there's also a word called eustress, which is positive stress. And, that's like the stress of doing a presentation. Well, that's probably just stressful, but there are positive stressors, like the stress of asking someone out or something, which is stressful, but it's for growing and learning and reaching out and connecting, right? That might just be stress as well. But aside from that, I was wondering that, if there's stressful cortisol, and that's called stress, and then there's eustress, might there be eucortisol? Meaning that, maybe it's the same cortisol, like structurally, but in a way but what I'm sharing this regarding is that there could be, like, in releasing an insight, in sharing an insight, it could release bad cortisol, but the information is positive stress or eustress. Receiving insights in mania is stressful. It, costs dopamine, it costs cognitive load and cognition energy in the brain. And people sometimes in mania walk around and try to share certain things that they're perceiving. I've been there too. Now I write them down instead. And that in a way is like stress, right? But if people were one day able to, like, decode what visionary people are saying, because sometimes they're saying things in, like, fragments of language, or at least listen and, like, have a dialogue or try to decode it, or people who experience these things are able to decode it themselves, or if large language models are able to decode it. This is actually more for people talking to people, but it's a positive stress for someone else to try to understand someone else, right? So people are sharing in the stress, but there can be positive stresses. Like if someone's really trying to communicate something important, then there can be a eustress or maybe a eucortisol associated with that. I'm not saying there's anything like that per se, but I was just trying to see the other side where it can also be a positive thing. If there's positive stress and there's positive times to be stressed and experience cortisol, then maybe there's ways to have sort of this flip side of things going on as well. And it could also be important to talk about these things because Dr. Tara Swart said, when we talk to friends and a therapist, the stress leaks through the skin. But I think it also comes out of the body when we talk with ourselves. So if there's light coming in that's giving us insights through these different mechanisms we'll talk about, then there's this possibility of like being cut off from that and gaining weight, which could be part, like the meds might change some kind of mechanism going on in the eye, right? They don't know how they work yet. And so what I'm trying to say is talking about the insights to release the eucortisol within oneself or to oneself could also be important, as well as perceiving them, receiving them, recording them, dialoguing about them. Just seeing a bit of like if they're talking about how cortisol can cause weight gain and light can cause weight gain, blue light, then by harvesting that and speaking about it, it might mitigate that, right? There's some kind of energy expenditure, yet it's not being fully processed. It's not being fully processed. And I'm talking about this weight gain thing, not from the perspective of weight gain is bad or good. Like I personally vary between, like, during my first mania, I went down to 90 pounds. That wasn't good. And up to like 145 for my frame and everything. But I'm talking more about the evidence of some energy excess or deficiency in terms of how I'm looking at it. And there was another guest on Diary of a CEO, and I believe it was this guest, Konstantin Kisanon. He said that, and these aren't my words, he said schizophrenics wrote the Bible. Basically visionaries, right? So this is more related to words and how listening to what visionaries are saying and trying to say, and maybe don't even know what they're saying, right? Like, if I'm really a visionary, am I going to know exactly what I'm saying in the beginning? Probably not, because I'm seeing something I have nearly no reference for in some of it. So it takes a while to start to make sense of it. And it doesn't even matter about making sense of it. It is building the capacity to make sense of something other than what we've been programmed to make sense of, right? And when we have a crisis, a lot of times we're perceiving or experiencing things that are like past, present, future. We don't even know when. Time doesn't make sense and all this. And it's something outside the program. So we've already had a sneak peek, and we can adapt. And what I see as my visionary self potentially happening in the future sometime is that all of the stuff we've been programmed to perceive and everything that we've kind of said as a result of that will be so digitized and algorithmized and everything that we'll have to see something else other than that, because all of that will just naturally be available to us at our fingertips or in our brain or something. So if we can't see something other than that, I don't know, I think we're going to be very bored, or I don't know what's going to happen. But that's why building the capacity to see outside the box is what's important. And that's part of what this is a big part, likely the most important part, because I could look at this, what I'm talking about now, and say, oh, I'm going to find all the papers and I'm going to listen to that 2-hour talk and I'm going to make sense of exactly how perceiving sort of extra information that we don't usually perceive, the mechanism of that in the eyes and the energy and all of that. Now, I may never do that. This is more like for fun, because it's fun to build that capacity, or to be in that capacity, and being in that capacity builds the capacity. So I'm not even trying to build the capacity. So being in the capacity is the only step. And then I don't have to try to build the capacity. It's just the capacity naturally does whatever it is that is interesting. Like, why would I do other than what's interesting for me, and other people do what's interesting for them? We're going to be interested in a lot of different things. Okay, so the next part that Dr. Jack Kruse says is that when light hits a protein in the eye, this is another example, and I don't know exactly what protein, it folds and it makes a light antenna. And then what he said was that with this antenna, the light now gets converted from an electromagnetic light wave to an electromechanical wave called sound. And he said that the sound is collected in water. So basically, this sounded very important to me, this piece, because light hits a protein and becomes creates an antenna for itself. Basically, light hits the eye and creates its own piano key. And then the light coming in now plays that key and creates sound. Light creates sound. So what I saw is that it's possible that seeing creates sound, right? It creates words. And so when I say I see and I hear words, this exact thing could be one of the mechanisms of that. There's also just hearing one's own internal mind chatter, and then that would make it so this other process here isn't really happening. So this could be the mechanism by which we see that we can see and say differently. So again, with his paper, or his presentation, I wouldn't be looking for what he's saying from it. I would be finding the paper to see if there's a mechanism by which perceiving is creating these other words that are of a different source. And you can see words, right? Like you can see them, not spelled out. You can see them in that you can hear them without hearing or seeing them in the brain. It's strange. That's the way it happens for me. Of course, everyone's different. And one of the things that is interesting too, potentially in the future, is starting to discuss our inner ways of processing information, right? Like our consciousness and how it works. So that's for later. So yeah, I wondered, is this how light and perception can create the sound of new insights? And also the importance of needing water. There was another book I read, and it's called You're Not Sick, You're Thirsty. And it was written by, I don't remember, but there was one part in the book that really struck my eye. And the things that I research, I remember where to find them and I make note of them. And this part for me is like, my memory still works in this way where it can remember putting pieces of a puzzle together. Back when I was in like high school and university, when I would write exams in university, I could do well on the very long exams because by answering the questions, I would remember the answers to other questions. So I would skip a question, then another question would come, and as I was writing out the answer, it would make me realize the connection, and then I'd be able to fill out the other answer. And I knew I'd be able to do that, so that's how I wrote exams. And so for this, they were saying in the book, and I would have to find a study or something eventually. I don't even think one was cited in there. Doesn't mean there isn't one. That tryptophan and tyrosine, tryptophan is like precursor to serotonin and melatonin, and tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine. And both of those are two of the 4 aromatic amino acids that are plentiful in the eye. Now, that's not what this book was saying. This book was just talking about those 2 amino acids in terms of water. And what the book said was that when we are dehydrated, our body, our brain, that tryptophan and tyrosine actually preferentially turn into antioxidants in the liver. I don't know if they are antioxidants in their simple subunit form or what, or if they build certain ones. So like when we're dehydrated, those molecules are going to make antioxidants in the liver. and maybe that's because we don't have enough water to dilute the toxicity in the blood and the body. So you got to make a lot of antioxidants to be able to deal with that. I don't know. I just said that extra. Now, if we have enough water, if we're properly hydrated, then tryptophan and tyrosine go towards making neurotransmitters in the brain. So to me, that's the way I remember it in the book. It could be slightly different, but to me, I was like, whoa, if we don't have enough water, basically we're not going to have enough neurotransmitters in our brain because tryptophan and tyrosine are not going to be going up there, to do that job as much. So that relates water to also the tryptophan and tyrosine in the brain, and maybe even the eye, maybe even in the eye, because the retina is an extension of the brain. I don't know where the amino acids come from in the eye. Might not need to get that detailed. So the next point that interested me was that he said that mitochondria will dehydrate. Basically that mitochondria, they create their own internal water. So the inside of mitochondria, the water is from the mitochondria. And I noted that down because I felt like that was important. And so it can't make as much water. Internally, I don't see how that connects yet exactly, because I haven't talked much about the mitochondria. I started to try to take less notes, knowing I was going to get back to it. The other part he said with the blue light is that he was saying that one of the reasons why the lens of the eye starts to get all hazy is because it's trying to protect the retina from blue light. And that was interesting to me. And learning more about that part is good. And it also inspired me to, wear some of the orange blue blocker glasses that I have. I'll probably forget, but for me, I'm shifting to be less interested myself in all these little health hacks and more interested in the words and the information and how this process works as a possibility. Like, where did all this information come from? Like right now, as I'm talking about trying to figure out how by which I have come to the place of wishing to talk about all this stuff, and how did that stuff come to be, so it's like this strange thing. Like maybe I'll never get to that, because that's definitely like a linear mechanized thing. I can understand it for myself pretty well, but then putting all the scientific pieces together takes longer. And since I didn't listen to the whole lecture, I don't have all the pieces to this for sure. And some of the things that I extrapolated to my own perspectives could be a little off base. But that's okay. Like, this is the fun part, because if I talk about it out loud now, then when I do look at the longer video and go deeper into it, if I happen to, then, I've already spoken it out loud. So I think in the same way that in the past I learned by seeing the connections, and then that helps to bring up the memory, by talking about it now, it helps to create those connections or see those connections without having to try to strongly memorize things. So before I memorized to a certain extent and I learned, and now it's like, I don't want to memorize. I want to talk about it, and I want to talk about more, and I want to talk about something new. I don't want to memorize. We don't need to memorize a lot of things now. And that's another reason to develop these capacities. And, maybe for other people, it's different capacities. Not everybody is drawn to words or has words kind of scribed in their brains. So what I'm talking about can be extrapolated to different types of capacity building. Any capacity that is out ahead of the AI or brings so much joy that to the individual that, AI can only augment life. So yeah, but even that doesn't matter. Like, I was doing this whole process for many years before AI came out, like since 2012 probably. No, 2013? I don't know. I'm just saying that now the AI makes it interesting because some stuff could be put in AI. The great thing actually is that I'm pretty sure I can have the AI read the papers. So say I go through that lecture, I find all the citations, I can kind of ask ChatGPT to read those papers and then put in my ideas and see what it says as part of it. So that's where it makes it interesting, right? Not to take over, but, to take over basically, and then do something else that's interesting now that we don't have to do that anymore. So, it's the same thing as like we don't use calculators anymore. Like the ones that were a separate little device or slide rules or whatever. Let's see what else is here. It's almost done. Yeah, so I'm wondering if our eyes do have that photosynthesis type equivalent. And I wrote photosynthesis with a hyphen, like photo dash synthesis. So like we take a photo with our eyes, like a movie, and then we can synthesize it into like a note, like songs. And, or that I actually feel that we can speak as the moment in that what we see has something in our whole visual field has something different to say than our programmed self, right? So our programmed self is saying something from the past and the moment is saying something directly now. And we can tune into that. And some people do. There could be there's a lot of other ways to think about it or describe it. One of the ways I was thinking about it was that, like imagine the world that we all live in, or each person lives in their own world, in their mind. Like it's a different experience, different person and everything. But we're like programmed in the same ways in general, in each culture at least. And then imagine that there is a world that is not very different from the world you live in or I live in or we all live in, but slightly different than the one that we're programmed with all along. Now imagine if that slight difference in world, seeing something just a little different than what we would just see by default every day, that little bit different world, imagine if that felt kind of meaningful and kind of magical. Like it didn't really have to be something that was like so out there. Like it didn't have to be something that you have to take something to get to, like take a substance, or it could literally be seeing what the moment is saying, which might speak in words with this mechanism of electromagnetic light being turned into sound. Just the way I'm telling the story about what I've been learning. And it feels kind of meaningful and kind of magical, mainly because it's saying something else than what we're used to listening to, So I guess we don't like that novelty. And it'd be cool if we could switch between the two modes or have those modes switch I would say, intelligently switch, right? Because if the, say, ego past mode is trying to tell the brain to go into the magical mode, and the magical, well, like, there's got to be some kind of thing in between, something more subtle that directs that, you know. Similar to, say, you're driving a car, like, we know driving a car, we need to be in car driving mode, like looking at the road, not like behind us, like putting our head over our shoulder, looking behind us. So it's could be like that. So we have a few more points, and we're entertaining these ideas. Let's see here. So something he said was that there's melanin granules in the eye, and those make a DC current in the eye. Now, this is when I realized, you know, I don't need to make the notes because I just need to watch the longer video. But melanin is that same pigment that is in our skin that we get tanned with the sun, or like whatever our skin color is. And they're also in the eye, and it makes DC electric current. And what I remember it saying is that this DC current goes faster to the brain than the brain is working. Now, I don't remember exactly, but I'm going to say this anyways. That means that it actually has to slow down the information coming from the eyes to meet the timing of the brain. Now, I'm seeing this now, now imagine in mania something that happens is that the brain speeds up to meet the speed of the eye that's going faster than the brain, instead of the brain slowing the information down. Now, that could be something, because we see very fast in mania and we act very quickly on what we see, rather than not that happening. So that could be something interesting. Yeah, I'm wondering if the brain speeds up in mania. You know, of all the stuff I've said, like that, since I don't have it written down, that's the one I'd want to remember of something that got made up here. So again, I would look for studies and things like that. But the trouble is that when I read science or listen to talks that are based on science, I see all these extrapolations, and if I were to check every single one with science, it would take forever. It would take forever. And I'm usually on to the next thing. That's something that ChatGPT could help with eventually. So anyways, I'm excited about that. And another thing he mentioned is that DHA is very important in the eye, and vitamin A, which is quite commonly known. And what I connected there, without going too much into that, was that I have this document somewhere that they recommended for early stage psychosis that fish oil be given. And fish oil has a high amount of DHA. So there could be a connection there between, you know, psychosis. If you say psychosis, you can hear I in there. And also that, you know, I had an experience. There's something with this melanin pathway. I'll be looking into it more at some point, because, okay, I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say this anyways. There's a website where you can see all the metabolic reactions in a chart, all the body's metabolic reactions. And I was looking at the one that creates dopamine, and I realized by looking at my genetic testing that I do not break down catecholamines very easily, and dopamine is a catecholamine, if I'm remembering correctly. There was a chemical reaction that was some steps before that changed a dopamine precursor into melanin. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness. I remember one time, or sometimes this happens to me, where I'm tanned and I haven't tanned. People will say, you're really tanned. I'm like, I haven't done any tanning. Or like been outside, or like been outside in months sometimes. And one time I was in the psych ward and I literally got so tanned. Like, so there's something there too related to that. And that, if I think about the light thing, now imagine there are, I should say, opsins in the skin, which are also in the eye, which detect light. And if it could be related to this water thing or energy thing, then getting a tan, or it could also be if my catecholamines can't break down dopamine, then a few steps before, in order to not make too much dopamine because I have too much already, then it converts it to making melanin. Not sure. That's a little bit a note to myself, because I remember being really fascinated with this particular area of chemical reactions in the body. And like I said, like, this is a way to put different pieces of a possible puzzle together that, you know, maybe one day ChatGPT is so good that I can literally say each of my perceived insights, whether they were out of nowhere or from reading science, and it will tell me if there's a paper that has a study about that, so as that's why it's important for me to learn how to use it, because it will help me figure out what to do and when and how, and maybe one day there could be a possibility of figuring out something really important. Who knows? And then let's see, what else is there here? He mentioned blue light is the antidote for blue light. No, blue light is the antidote for vitamin A and vitamin D. And I didn't know what he meant by that, because apparently, like, what he was saying, blue light's bad, so how is it the antidote for anything? Now, to me, it sounds more like he was saying blue light makes vitamin A. That doesn't sound like an antidote. It sounds like a precursor. So that's one thing I was confused about. So it's good to write the things like that down too. So in terms of obesity, he was saying vitamin A deficiency as well as DHA, and not getting enough natural light, and not, like, basically people can become blue light toxic. So I just wanted to say something about what he's saying in his video, because for me, most of what I watch, I just end up extrapolating all these bits and pieces. Like, I'm interested in the process, but not the conclusion, because I'm wondering about totally different things, mostly unrelated. And, in that way, it's fun to learn from a wide range of things. Like, I find that so many things have clues and something to make note of. It's like an interesting mystery, I guess. It's a mystery. And I made a note to myself. I didn't take notes on the last 5 minutes. So in conclusion, blue light, man-made blue light, is bad. And he said it affects the way mitochondria can handle electrons from food. Now that conclusion, I didn't actually see all that. He didn't really say very much about mitochondria. I'm sure that it plays a much larger role. And I tried to do like a ketogenic diet earlier this year, and I could not even get into ketosis. And, you know, maybe I could have done other things to get there, but I almost had this sense that, you know, ketosis is one way to help mitochondria, but there could be this light, water, blue light kind of mechanism that can also help. And I will watch the whole talk. Okay, and I'm going to say one last thing that is totally unrelated, and it was just a little snippet. I wish I would have written down some of the little bits and pieces I learned from YouTube videos over the last 3 months, the ones that, you know, weren't a ton of educational content, but some were. And something that was mentioned in a pretty cool YouTube video about, can't remember what, I can link it. They were saying that the reason that institutions were created originally back in the day for criminals and the quote mentally ill, they were grouped in them together. And the reason for them was, one of the reasons was that the powers that be at the time, which was likely more of like a monarch type ruler thing, did not want everyone to see people being lazy. They didn't want them to see all these people kind of like sitting around, or, you know, maybe the criminals were out doing the opposite and like doing whatever they're doing that wasn't lazy but not good. But I found that like an interesting little tidbit. So yeah, what do you think about that tidbit? And I talked a lot and about a lot of stuff, but I'm curious how this will begin to create tomorrow. I'm glad that I paused and took some time to go outside and just get some shopping done. And I'm not sure even what I'll do next. I also found it interesting that I thought I would be just deep diving into like the notes I already have in the computer, kind of scrolling around like that. But all of a sudden, all I had was notes written in a book, which I don't usually do, and a different process. So maybe I need to get good at having a different process every day. I thought I was going to do a screen record thing. Now I'm just talking and looking at handwritten notes. Maybe I'll try different things. And I think the main thing right now is just speaking. I haven't really done much of that in 5 years. And now that AI is good with all these text things, then learning to talk, and eventually at some point, even having a conversation with ChatGPT. I used to have a subscription, but I canceled it, and I would have to get that going again. So I need to maybe train myself to make use of a paid version of that, if that is something I choose to do. And hopefully I'll do more of this in the wintertime and get outside a lot in the spring. We will see. We will see. I'm trying to relax about it. So until tomorrow, I hope you have a great sleep.